Once again, it's time for our monthly trip back to 1965. So without further ado, let's take a look at some cool British singles released in March of that year. Let's begin.
I'd give you everything and more, and that's for sure.
This 45 by the Yardbirds was the group's third single, and it became their first top 5 hit. The release of the single, however, prompted Eric Clapton to leave the group. Beat Instrumental magazine reported,
"Looks very much as if the most blues-wailing Yardbirds have finally broken through in a big way, but only after a lot of internal argument about policy. The boys have now moved way away from the rhythm and blues scene, which meant the departure of purist Eric Slowhand Clapton, and which also meant a tricky problem for Jeff Beck from the Tridents, who took over on lead guitar. Jeff said, Eric was very popular. And now, I honestly find I can't look directly at audiences. I've got this feeling, that they're all there just waiting for me to make a mistake so they can stand shouting out to get Eric back in the group. Maybe I'll get over it, but it's a very real problem right now."
The song was written by Graham Gouldman, who at the time was still playing in a group called the Mockingbirds. The New Musical Express wrote,
"Strangely insistent minor key item. For Your Love has strident chords, bongos, and drum thumps. Then, it suddenly changes into an orthodox shaker. Lead singer of the Yardbirds handles the plaintive lyric while the others chant the title phrase. It's unusual. It makes you sit up and take notice."
The B-side was a fantastic instrumental number featuring some great fiery licks by Eric Clapton. The single became a huge hit, reaching number 3 in Britain and number 6 in the States. For Your Love achieved its highest chart position in Canada, where it managed to reach number 1.
Wow, here it comes.
March 1965 also saw the release of this excellent single by Dem. This was the group's third single, released 4 months after Baby Please Don't Go, which became a huge hit for the group in late 1964. Here Comes the Night was written and produced by Bert Burns, and it featured Jimmy Page on guitar. As you will see as you keep watching the video, Jimmy Page played on pretty much half of the songs featured on this episode. Bert Burns wrote the song specifically for the group, but Decca Records Rush released a recording of the song by Lulu in November 1964, and as you're probably already guessing, yes, Jimmy Page also played guitar on it.
Here comes the night. Oh, yeah.
Luckily for the group, the version by Lulu didn't even manage to reach the top 40, so it didn't affect record sales. The B-side was a fantastic bluesy number featuring some excellent vocals by Van Morrison.
I wanna get you, yeah, keep you all for myself.
The New Musical Express wrote,
A most distinctive, soulful styling of the beat ballad, Here Comes the Night. Should do very well indeed for them. Lead singer handles the unusually conceived lyric, which seems to have too many words in each line, with the others harmonizing the title phrase. Tambourine offsets the shuffle rhythm backing. There's an intriguing guitar figure and a fascinating guitar solo, a thoroughly absorbing disc, even if a little rough at the edges.
Here Comes the Night became a huge success. The single peaked at number 2 in the UK and number 24 in the States, spending 10 weeks on the US chart. To this day, Here Comes the Night remains the highest charting single for Van Morrison in both the UK and Ireland. The Fairies never managed to score a hit in the charts, but the group was well known in clubs all over Britain for their wild and anarchic rhythm and blues sound. The Fairies were very influenced by the Pretty Things, and in fact this track called Get Yourself Home was initially offered to the Pretties, who recorded their own version of the song in early 1965.
Please don't you roam. Get yourself home. Come on, get yourself home.
The Pretty Things, however, decided not to release the track as a single, and the song remained unreleased until it appeared on Pretty Things compilations many years later. Due to the fact that the Pretty Things chose not to release it, the Fairies recorded the song and issued it as a single.
Get yourself home. Get yourself home, get on the train, 'cause I'm all alone.
This was one of the rawest and wildest British recordings released in March 1965. And just like the Pretty Things, the length of their hair was shockingly long for early 1965. The group featured Twink on drums, who later in the 60s played drums for bands such as Tomorrow. And he also ended up playing with the Fairies' biggest influence, the Pretty Things. The B-side was this raw and frantic bluesy number.
Wait a minute, come on now.
This is another track which perfectly captured the aggressive and unpolished sound that the group performed in rhythm and blues clubs all over Britain. Unfortunately, the single was largely ignored by both the press and the pirate radio stations, and it inevitably sank without a trace. But the A-side of the single has appeared on multiple compilations over the years, and it was also featured on the second Nuggets box set.
I pity the fool. Well, I said I pity the fool.
March 1965 also saw the release of this single by the Manish Boys, which was produced by Shel Talmy. The Manish Boys featured none other than David Bowie on lead vocals.
Look at the people. It's wonder what they're doing.
David Bowie, who at the time was still known as David Jones, debuted in June 1964 with this track called Liza Jane, which was released as Davy Jones and the King Bees.
Well, I got a girl that's good to me.
Bowie left the King Bees a month after the release of the single, and he joined this rhythm and blues outfit called the Manish Boys in early 1965. The A-side of the single was a cover of this classic track by Bobby Blue Bland. And just like many singles from that period, the song featured Jimmy Page on guitar.
I said I pity the fool.
In an interview many years later, Bowie recalled,
When I was a baby, I did a rock session with one of the millions of bands that I had in the 60s. It was the Manish Boys, that's what it was. And the session guitar player doing the solo was this young kid who'd just come out of art school and was already a top session man, Jimmy Page. And he just got a fuzz box and he used that for the solo. He was wildly excited about it. He was a fresh-faced kid who had a real joy for playing.
The B-side of the single was a song called Take My Tip, which has gone down in history as the first original Bowie composition to be commercially released.
She got the green badge, my oh my. You gotta act tall, think big if you wanna make a mark.
The track was very influenced by groups such as Georgie Fame and the Blue Flames. The Manish Boys managed to get some press attention after Bowie appeared on television as the founder of the Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Long-Haired Men.
A 17-year-old Davy Jones has just founded the Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Long-Haired Men. Now, exactly who's being cruel to you?
Well, I think we're all fairly tolerant, but for the last 2 years we've had comments like darling and can I carry a handbag thrown at us. I think it's just had to stop now.
The single got positive reviews in the press. Record Mirror wrote,
Little known outside the London clubs, they cut their first disc on March 5th, and their main claim to fame at present is that they have produced another new sound. It is the sax sound, and the group contains 2 tenor saxophones, one played by Davy Jones himself, a baritone sax, lead guitar, bass guitar, organ, and drums. All the boys come from Maidstone in Kent, except for 18-year-old Davy Jones, who hails from Bromley.
Despite the press attention and a few more appearances on television, the single failed to make the charts.
And I know that everybody be happy, as happy as you and me. 'Cause I know.
The Kinks released their 6th single in March 1965. It was a good single, but the record was perhaps not as strong as some of their earlier 45s. And having their previous 3 singles all chart among the top 2, it was less successful, reaching number 17. The B-side was a good song that probably should have been released as the A-side of the single.
Who'll be the next in line? Who'll be the next to watch your love fade? All your affections finally fade away.
Beat Instrumental magazine wrote,
One thing about the Kinks, you can't say all their records sound the same. Their new one, another Ray Davies original, is quite different and is titled Everybody's Gonna Be Happy. It's much faster than anything they've attempted before. Gone is the usual distorted sound. In comes a really raving, almost rock and roll sounding number. I can't see it being another number 1, but it's a cert for the top 5. The number was recorded in 3 takes at Pi's Marble Arch Studios and produced by Shel Talmy. Talmy said, "There's no messing around with these boys. They just walk in the studio, play the numbers a couple of times, and walk out again. The whole image of the Kinks is built around this rough recording sound. If we get all technical and add orchestras, there's no telling what would happen. The boys never really rehearse their numbers before a session. They know what the tune is and what the chords are. All the arrangement is worked out in the studio." On this particular session, Pete Quaife made up the bass riff as the song was being recorded. Whether this number is another big hit or not, one thing's certain. If the Kinks keep up this change pattern with every disc, they'll never be out of the ever-changing hit parade.
The single reached number 17 in Britain. Following the disappointing performance in the UK, their record label held off releasing the single in the States. The single was eventually released there 4 months later, with Who'll Be the Next in Line as the A-side. In the United States, the single reached number 34 according to Billboard.
But I may as well try and catch the wind.
Currently at number 4, it's Donovan with this fantastic folky number called Catch the Wind. Catch him next Friday on Ready, Steady, Go.
Donovan released his first single in March 1965. Even before the single was released, Donovan had already become a star in Britain through his live performances on the pop television show Ready, Steady, Go. In late 1964, Donovan was offered a management and publishing contract by Peter Eden and Jeff Stevens of Pi Records. Stevens introduced Donovan to Ready, Steady, Go producer Bob Bickford, and the producer was so impressed with Donovan's demos that he gave him the biggest break he could hope for, a regular spot of his own on the program for 3 weeks, before he had even cut his first disc. Record Mirror wrote,
Although he hasn't been around for too long, the vocal tones of Donovan are still very familiar. Naturally, his debut single is a simple, gentle number, self-penned, and with a plaintive, poignant flavor. It's pretty, and it builds up slightly in volume towards the end. Dare we say it? But there is a shade of Bob Dylan about this. A hit, of course.
The song bore more than a passing resemblance to Chimes of Freedom by Bob Dylan, and of course the press was quick to establish comparisons. But Catch the Wind is a great song in its own right, and it has an endearing, charming naivety, which is probably the main reason why the song still remains a big favorite among Donovan fans. The B-side was another track which was very reminiscent of Bob Dylan.
Hey, 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 why do you treat me like you do?
At this point, Donovan was seen as a poor man's Bob Dylan, but Donovan eventually developed his own style and sound. And just a year later in 1966, the whole Sunshine Superman album was a truly groundbreaking record with a mix of folk and jazz and psychedelia, which was very unique and new. Donovan's debut single reached number 4 in Britain and number 23 in the States.
Why do you treat me like you do? Night comes down like shades of falling rain. Night comes down like shades of falling rain.
Another highlight from March 1965 was this excellent bluesy B-side by Mickey Finn. The group featured Jimmy Page on guitar, who was alternating his work with the group with his session work. The band was formed in the East End in 1963 as Mickey Finn and the Blue Men. They started out as a rhythm and blues band, but they soon embraced blue beat, a Jamaican style that was quite popular in Britain in the early to mid-60s. And the group specialized on recording blue beat covers of rhythm and blues numbers by Bo Diddley, such as Pills.
She said, hold out your arm, stick out your tongue, child. I got some pills on, give you some.
And Hush Your Mouth.
Hush, hush, shut your mouth. 'Cause baby, you're knocking me out. I said, hush, hush.
By late 1964, however, the group had returned to their rhythm and blues roots. This single from March 1965 was their 4th single. The A-side was a decent moody number called This Sporting Life.
'Cause this sporting life is gonna be the death of me.
But the highlight was definitely the B-side. Night Comes Down was a dark bluesy number featuring some great vocals by Mickey Finn and some exquisite guitar work by Jimmy Page. At one point, the song even starts to sound strikingly similar to some of the material that was featured on the Velvet Underground's debut album a couple of years later. Unfortunately, the single went pretty much unnoticed and didn't get any airplay on the radio. But this B-side became a cult favorite years later through its appearance on multiple compilations of obscure British singles from the 60s. And the track enjoyed a new lease of life in 2016, when the song was featured on an episode of Vinyl, a television series produced by Martin Scorsese and Mick Jagger.
You need a living soul to put you right.
This song by the Little Darlings became a huge hit in 1967 when it was covered by an American group called The Music Explosion, who managed to take the song to number 2 in the States. But this version by Coventry group The Little Darlings was the original version.
You gotta make like you wanna live real.
The track was written by John Carter and Ken Lewis. The two songwriters got their start in music in the early 60s as Carter Lewis and the Southerners. And one of the many lineups of the group featured a young Jimmy Page on guitar and future Pretty Things member Viv Prince on drums. By 1965, however, Carter and Lewis were focused on writing songs for other artists, and they wrote plenty of hits for Herman's Hermits, Peter and Gordon, and Brenda Lee among many others. This original version of A Little Bit of Soul by the Little Darlings was a big commercial failure, and by the time the Music Explosion recorded their cover in 1967, most people weren't even aware that the song had already been recorded by a British band in 1965. The B-side was another Carter and Lewis composition, which wasn't as good as the A-side, but it's still worth a spin for the excellent raw guitar sounds featured on the song. Not sure if this one featured Jimmy Page or not, though. The New Musical Express wrote,
The Little Darlings debut with 2 Carter Lewis compositions, the punch-packed vibrant shouter, Little Bit of Soul, and the up-tempo, Easy to Cry. Not a great deal of melody, but plenty of excitement.
As previously stated, the original version by the Little Darlings was a flop, while the cover by the Music Explosion reached number 2 in the States and was certified gold by the Recording Industry Association of America for sales of 1 million copies. The Music Explosion cover, however, didn't manage to make the charts in Britain.
Love to see you stroll, coming down the line. Tell the fellas, keep your hands off, she mine. Woo, babe.
David John and The Mood were one of many British bands who appeared on the scene during the so-called British rhythm and blues boom in 1964. This single from March 1965 was produced by genius British producer Joe Meek. The A-side of the single was Bring It to Jerome, a Bo Diddley classic which was originally written by Diddley's percussionist Jerome Green.
Well, bring it on home. Bring it to Jerome. Yo, man, so bring it on home.
It was a good cover, but to my ears the highlight of the single was the B-side. The song was credited to W.C. Charnley, which was actually a pseudonym for the band itself. The rhythm backing on the A-side was created with the help of Joe Meek's inventive studio tricks. In an interview several years later, lead singer David John recalled,
We felt we needed something different to add to our version of Bring It to Jerome, so I went to the toilet and dismantled the metal chain. When I got back to the studio, Joe's eyes lit up, and he immediately left the room and returned with an old biscuit tin. We dropped the chain into the tin on the beat, and Joe layered it with echo and mixed it into the recording. It sounded fantastic.
I said, bring it on home. Bring it to Jerome.
The single, however, got mixed reviews in the press. Record Mirror wrote,
A persistent sound on this old diddly number, wailing harmonica, and even more wailing from The Mood. Beaty and quite well performed, but maybe a bit outdated by now.
the single didn't manage to make the chart.
Little things that you do make me glad I'm in love with.
This 45 by Dave Berry is yet another single from March 1965 which featured Jimmy Page on guitar. The A-side was this track called Little Things, which had been originally released in the States by Bobby Goldsboro in January 1965. Dave Berry had a group called The Cruisers as his backing band, and due to the fact that Berry enjoyed more success in Europe than in his native Britain, the group backed Dave Berry on multiple European tours. The Cruisers were a good band who could really rock, and their guitarist Frank Miles was one of the first British guitar players to use a Gibson double-neck guitar. But most singles by Dave Berry featured session musicians. Beat Instrumental magazine reported,
"I've only used the boys on Memphis, Tennessee," Dave told me. "On all his discs since, he has had session men Jimmy Page and Big Jim Sullivan alternating between rhythm and lead, Bobby Graham on drums, and Alan Welling on bass. I find that it's much easier this way," Dave told me. "In a recording studio, you don't always have time, so the number I'm recording is shown to the 4 session men, who can all read music, and we start straight away." On Dave's hit Little Things, the lead figure was played by Jimmy Page, which was supplemented by girls' voices and 2 trumpets in the background.
The original version of Little Things by Bobby Goldsboro was not a hit in Britain, so Dave Berry's version became a big hit, reaching number 5 and remaining in the top 40 for 10 weeks. I hope you enjoyed this trip back to 1965. See you next time.